There's a whole lot of things served as authentic gumbo in restaurants, and some of them are good, but they're not this. This is New Orleans seafood gumbo, or Creole gumbo, or filet gumbo. And you'd get this if you got invited to somebody's house between Thanksgiving and Easter for a special occasion. And they like you a lot. The roux. The roux is the body and soul of gumbo. And that sounds kind of dramatic, but it really is. It's the base flavor and the thickener. It's also where I'm gonna commit a bit of heresy. Basically, roux is just cooked flour. Traditionally, you put half oil and half flour in a heavy pan and you cook it until it's somewhere from dark peanut butter to dark chocolate. And then you stop the cooking by adding the Trinity, usually just the onions and celery at first, and then the bell pepper and everything else. My heretic roux really is just some baked flour that you put in the oven and stir every 15 minutes at 400 until it's about the color of cinnamon. I got about 2 cups of flour in a Dutch oven, leave it uncovered, and just pop it into the oven. That's it. These are the colors that you're looking for. The one on the right went for about an hour and a half, stirring every 15 minutes at 400. And the one on the left probably went for an hour. The lighter one will have a slightly better thickening power, but both of them will darken considerably when they're hydrated. Baking the flour has 2 big advantages. One, it's hard to burn. It's much harder to burn than traditional methods, and it's also a lot easier on your arm. But 2, it picks up a whole lot of flavor that gets tossed. All the fats that you have in the gumbo tend to float to the top, and you'll end up with a layer of fat that you got to skim off, and that's not good eats. So what we do is I skim it off, and we actually add the dry roux to that. Picks up all of that flavor again, goes right back into gumbo, and nothing is lost. Once you've started the roux, you need to peel your shrimp. You really want whole shrimp because you can use the head and tail shells to make your stock. You put them in about 4 quarts of cold water and then bring that up to a simmer, and that's going to make a much, much richer gumbo. Plastic doohickey is really handy for peeling shrimp. You find those in seafood markets or at sporting goods stores. Just pull the head off, slide it up through the tail, and off it comes. Put your peeled shrimp on ice and put the pot on a simmer, and we'll get started on the meats. Brown it. And brown is important because brown tastes good. I usually cut the hot sausage at an angle and cut little wheels out of the regular sausage. That way people can identify what they want. Pretty much everything gets cut into oversized, bite-sized pieces. It's going to shrink a little when it gets to the pot. The ham is really good because it's got a lot of water in it, and with the dry roux, you want that to help to deglaze your pan, and it also adds a fat, again for the same reason. And it also just tastes good. It adds a lot to the stock. Cut your chicken into the same bite-sized pieces, and then we'll get started browning all the meats. Why? Because brown tastes good. It's also an often neglected step. People don't often brown all their meats as hard as they should, but it really is important. So after that, get started cutting your Trinity, chopping your onions. Everything's going to get a kind of a finer, coarse cut. The onions, the bell peppers, the celery. I like to think of these things in terms of proportions instead of like a recipe. And so for me, it's 1 big bell pepper, 2 medium to large onions, and 3 ribs of celery for about 4 quarts of gumbo. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Makes it relatively easy to remember, and it scales up and down readily. I don't know why they call it a Trinity, because there's always garlic, and there's always shallots or green onions, and they go in there too, but they call it a Trinity. I'm already bucking the system with the roux, so I'm not gonna argue. Did I mention that brown tastes good? And when I say brown, I mean very, very brown. This is sticking to the pan a bit, but that's okay, because we're gonna, again, I mentioned we're gonna deglaze this. We're gonna get all of that fond off of there. And what we're trying to do is render some of the fat. And we're gonna pick it up when we put in that dry roux. It's gonna absorb all of it and get all of that flavor. I'm not gonna miss a thing. So add the ham to the sausage as it's pretty much finished. You're gonna take the sausage out, get the ham in there. Again, there's a lot of water in it, so it helps to release that fond. And you remember those shrimp shells that you reserved? Well, they've been bubbling away, waiting for you. And oh, they've made a lovely, lovely stock that we're gonna strain all those shells out and gonna use in a minute. So the ham has been browned off and has rendered some really good fat. And I'm gonna brown the chuck in this. Don't forget that the enemy of brown is moving stuff around. So you wanna put it in there and leave it alone. Go ahead and remove the browned chuck. And again, this fond's getting a little dark. I actually did start the chicken in here, but I wanna go on and deglaze because dark is good, but too much dark is burnt. Again, charred meat is good, but charred roux is not a good eats at all. You want to deglaze this with some water, and you can use a leaky bottle if you want to, make a mess on the stove. But what's most important is that you scrape the bottom of this pan and get all of that fond off, and you're going to reserve it because that's going to go right back into your cooked dry roux, which is an important distinction because raw flour tastes like cardboard and burnt roux tastes like burnt toast, and your entire gumbo will taste like burnt toast. The char in your meat's okay, but not in your roux. That's not good. So the chicken's gone back in. Again, it started on the before I deglazed, and I finished it after I deglazed it, and I'm removing it now. Let's let go of some fats, and I'm happy enough with that. And now I'm going to start to add the dry cooked roux, which is different than conventional roux, which is different. This has been cooked for an hour in the oven. I talked about that before. You're going to use about a total of a cup of dry roux. You can start out with about a quarter cup or so, and that's just to absorb the fats in here. Try not to flick too much onto the stove. And you're going to add some of that the pot renderings that you had, and that's going to add color and flavor. Again, this is cooked flour, not raw flour, and it's picking up all that color and flavor that you would be missing if you hadn't put all of those, if you hadn't got that stuff out of the pot. Stir this up until it's almost like a fudge. Add some stock from your pot, and then you're gonna put your onions and celery in here to essentially coat them. Again, all you're doing right now is hydrating the flour, getting it wet again. Now you're starting to cook your onions and celery and add some stock. Stir it up, and basically you're gonna coat it with the roux. This is what you'd be doing with a conventional roux, but this would be really, really hot, and well, one, it could burn you, and that's no fun. You wanna scrape the bottom of the pot, get everything out of there. After that's gone for about 5 minutes and the onion starts to get a little translucent, you wanna bring in your bell pepper. Stir that around, add a little bit more stock, stir it around. Again, really you're just coating this stuff. And then you're going to bring in your garlic and the shallots, or your green onions, both. Stir it around, add a little stock till it's about this consistency. Again, this is just to coat this and get this going. Everything's loose off the bottom of the pan. And then we're gonna open up that lovely pot of stock that's been sitting over there simmering and waiting for you, that you use those shells that you work so hard for. Add in the liquor from the pint of oysters that you drained. It's about to be very yummy. That goes in there. And again, referring to conventional roux, if you were cooking the roux, it would be really hot right now. And if you dumped it in there, it'd be splattering everywhere. Roux's called Cajun napalm. That's gonna go around for about 5 minutes. and then you're gonna dump all your meats in with all their fats and stir it. And then that goes for about 5 minutes. And you come back and it looks like sewer explodes details at 7. But that's okay. That's what's important about the dry roux. You're gonna pick up all of those fats that are floating on the top that you'd be skimming off. This is also the point where I like to season it. In my seasonings are what? Paprika, cayenne, some sage, some thyme, some salt, and black pepper, not whole black peppercorns. Grind all up till it's fine, and at least 3 bay leaves, and some Cajun seasoning. And about 1 teaspoon of everything, 3 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of the ground black pepper. That's all teaspoons. Again, I put it all in there, give it a good stir, and then you're gonna start skimming. And as you skim, you're pulling off all of the fat and anything that's floating on the top, and you're reserving that. And what we're gonna do is you're gonna use the rest of that 3/4 of a cup, the rest of that cup of dry roux, to incorporate that in and then put it right back in the pot. And this is gonna be yummy. That's the same pot. You add the skimmings, and you're gonna skim 2 or 3 times. So you put it in here, it's the pot's going right next to you. You add a bit of dry roux. You add some stock, get it bubbling, add some dry roux, and stir it. And again, there's not hard, fast number on how much roux you put in. The roux is the thickener, and you don't want it too thick. Gumbo is thicker than soup, but thinner than stew. So I need to turn that fire down and just incorporate it. And again, this is cooked roux. This isn't raw. And all it needs to do essentially is to dissolve. And that's what it just did. Added some more stock, and I probably skimmed once or twice already. And basically I picked up all of the fats. It looks like there's still a little bit in there, but that's thick enough. It's definitely not gonna be that thick. That's gonna thicken the entire pot. You drop that in there, stir it up, and that goes for about 40 minutes. After 40 minutes, you add in that crab, and then you let that go for about 15 bubbling, and you add your shrimp. And the shrimp only cook for another 15 minutes, and it is time to eat. You want to taste for salt. You don't want it to be salty, but in fact, you definitely don't want to taste it all the way to salty. It should be just shy of correct, because it needs to marry, and by tomorrow, everything will be tasting wonderful. This keeps you from having any big film of fat on the top, and you got a delightful gumbo. I used, what is that? Dungeness crabs, I think, instead of the traditional blue crabs, because you can eat them. There's actual meat. Blue crabs is just too much work. The Dungeness crabs, there's actually a big chunk of meat that's worth eating. Now it's time to eat. And I serve gumbo with rice. Other people put other things like boiled eggs, and I don't. And the only thing wrong with this plate, this bowl, is it's too small. And I need a bigger one, because that crab ain't gonna fit. And that's good gumbo. Yum.